might be the first time I've ever heard of a cryptid or unexplained creature allegedly leading to a small town's evacuation due to ongoing and escalating attacks. This story was sent to me, titled, "You're Not Going to Believe This," from Aspect 23, and it's rather disturbing. It details a Skinwalker-like entity who seems to randomly appear in an unnamed small town. A police officer recollects his experiences and even his own encounters with the creature, leading up to a tragic climax. You see, this is the Skinwalker that forced a town to evacuate. I was a deputy sheriff in a small town in northern Arizona. The year was 2003. The town had maybe 600 people. I'd taken that job after some years working in Phoenix. My wife wanted our daughter somewhere safe, so we went to a small town. Quiet, boring, a good place to raise a kid. I'm not using the real name of the town, by the way. If you're from northern Arizona, you might be able to figure it out from the details, but I'm not going to make it easy. Some of the people involved still live in the area, and they don't want this dredged up. I left law enforcement in 2004, and I've kept quiet about this for 20 years. The first call came September 23rd. A woman on Juniper Road named Janet Holloway said someone had been looking in her windows at night. This happened twice. She saw a face at the kitchen window around 9 p.m. Whoever it was had to be standing on something, or they were very tall. She couldn't make out features, but the proportions seemed off, according to her. That's the word she used, off. I went out there, took a look around. I found some scuff marks under the window, but nothing clear. The ground was hard and rocky. I'm 6'1", and I had to stand on my tiptoes to see in that window properly. I told her to keep the lights on and call if it happened again. 2 more calls came in that same week. A Mr. Rodriguez saw someone outside his bedroom window at 2 a.m. Said they were moving funny. Thought maybe they were on drugs. His dog barked all night and would not go outside until the sun came up. Then the Bartleys. Same thing. A face in the window. Too tall, with strange proportions. Sheriff Dave and I talked it over. We wondered if it was kids messing around, or the aforementioned someone on drugs. We put out the word, told people to lock up. We thought this was something that would blow over. Small towns get like that sometimes. One person sees something and suddenly everyone's seeing it. But this didn't blow over. A few weeks later, there were livestock killings. Tom Dillon's chickens were first. A dozen of them were killed in one night, torn apart and left there. The wire on his coop had been ripped like paper. There were no clear prints, just smears. Then Barbara Fremont's goat. Same thing happened. Killed but not eaten. Then more chickens and rabbits. By the end of that month, there were maybe a dozen incidents. People started sitting out with rifles at night. One guy I knew, named Bill, guarded his coop 3 nights straight. The night he gave up and went inside, though, something got all 15 of his birds. It was like it knew. Like it was waiting for him to skip a night, to go back being comfortable. The sightings kept coming. Not just at windows anymore. Standing at the edge of yards out by the tree line, in the middle of the road. A guy named Brandon saw it at 3 a.m., said it just stood there in his lane, watching him swerve around it. This Brandon was a practical guy, not prone to making things up or telling tall tales. He said it was 7 feet tall, maybe. Too thin, and very unnerving to look at, quote-unquote. Everyone seemed to be describing it the same way. Very tall, oddly proportioned, moving as if they were on drugs. Nobody got a clear look at the face, though. It was always too dark or too far, or they were too scared to look. Again, I was still thinking drugs. Maybe some mentally ill guy living rough in the hills. Plenty of places to hide out there. I was not thinking anything else. Still, I wasn't sure what it was. Then came the call that changed things. Patricia Ames called 911 around midnight. I was home, off duty, but I had the scanner on like I usually did. Something about the way Patricia sounded made me get in my truck, even though I was not on call. Someone was outside her house, calling her name in her husband's voice, saying,
"Trish, come outside. Trish, I need you out here."
She almost went. That's what scared her the most. She almost went outside because it sounded exactly like her Dan. Same tone and the same way he said her name. She was half asleep and thought he'd gone outside and needed her. But then she rolled over, and there was her real Dan, asleep in bed next to her. Then she heard it again.
"Trish, why won't you come outside? I need you."
It was coming from right outside their bedroom window. She shook Dan awake, and they both heard it, his voice calling her name. But Dan was there next to her, awake now, hearing his own voice coming from outside. He grabbed his hunting rifle, and I got the call maybe 2 minutes later. I got there in 10 minutes. Every light in the house was on, every single one. Dan was on the porch with his gun, shaking. He's a big guy, a construction worker, with arms like tree trunks. He had also done 2 tours overseas. This was someone who was not supposed to get scared, not like this. But there he was, shaking like a leaf. Patricia was inside with their 2 kids, who they'd woke up and brought into the living room. She kept saying, "It knew his voice. Exactly his voice. How did it know? Why was it so close?" I searched over their property with my flashlight. Dan followed behind me with his gun. The house sat on about an acre, backed up to empty land and hills. Around back, under their bedroom window, I found prints. Barefoot, human-shaped, but not right. They were a bit too long, 14, about 15 inches from heel to toe. I wear size 11 boots, and these made mine look like a toddler's. The stride was wrong too, spread too far apart, like whatever made them was taking huge steps, as if they were on stilts, or its legs were twice as long as they should be. Or maybe that was the tell of how it moved, the way people said it moved wrong. Maybe this explained it. I took measurements with my tape measure, took photos with a digital camera the department had just gotten. One of those early ones, maybe 3 megapixels. But it was something, better than nothing. We tried to make plaster casts, but the ground was too hard and too rocky. The casts broke when I tried to lift them. We wound up following the prints toward the hills for maybe 50 yards. Dan stayed with me. Then the prints just stopped. Not faded or unclear, but stopped. Right in the middle of a clear patch of dirt, too. The last print and then nothing. It was like whatever made them lifted off the ground and just flew away. I stood there looking at that last print for a while. Dan was standing next to me, not saying anything until finally, "What the heck is going on?" But I didn't have an answer for him. We went back to the house. I told them to call if anything else happened, that we'd have patrols drive by every hour, and I made sure to tell them to lock their doors, maybe stay with family for a few days if they were scared. Patricia started crying then, and Dan put his arm around her. This one was hard to report, so I just wrote what I saw. The prints, measurements, photos, and I wrote what they said about the voice. Dave looked at it the next morning and didn't say much. He nodded slowly and filed it. We were out of our depth here, and I think we both knew it. This was not normal police work. This wasn't something they taught at the academy. We didn't sign up for any X-Files bullcrap. School started having problems around mid-November. The elementary and middle school shared a building. About 150 kids total. Kids had always walked to and from that school. But November came, and suddenly parents were picking up every kid, every day. The parking lot was packed at 3 o'clock. Even kids who lived only 2 blocks away were getting picked up. Miss Herrera pulled me aside at the grocery store one Saturday. She had taught Emily in 6th grade. She let me know that the kids were scared. They were telling each other stories in class. Some had seen things at their windows, or at the playground even, during recess. The teachers, of course, were scared too. You could see it in her face, in their faces. Parents would call every day asking what the school was doing about safety. The principal called an emergency meeting with Dave and me. He wanted to know if we should close the school, if the kids were in danger. We told him we honestly didn't know, but told him to keep the kids inside during recess and keep the doors locked. Don't let anyone out until a parent was there. Saying it out loud like that, it felt inadequate. My daughter Emily was 13. She was in the 8th grade now. Usually I couldn't shut her up at dinner, but she got quiet that month and wouldn't even talk about school, wouldn't talk about what was going on. My wife Carol said she wasn't sleeping well. I'd hear her up at 2 a.m. watching TV because she didn't want to be in her room alone. The sightings increased, almost nightly now. In town too, not just the outskirts. Between houses and parking lots, someone saw it on the church roof, and people started seeing more than one. On occasion, 2 figures standing together, sometimes 3 walking the ridgeline at dusk. Then the teenagers. That same month, maybe the 16th or 17th, 5 kids went to the usual spot outside town, a clearing about 2 miles out, off some old back road, where kids went to drink around a bonfire. They were drinking beer and hanging out. The parents knew about it, but kind of looked the other way, as long as nobody was driving drunk. A small town thing, I guess. A girl named Sarah was one of them. She was 16, a junior. Her dad worked at the hardware store. A nice family, really. 5 of them went out there in Sarah's car around 9 p.m. that Saturday. Around 11 or 11:30, 4 of them came running back to town on foot. They'd left Sarah's car out there. They left everything. Their clothes were torn. One kid's face got all cut up from running through brush in the dark. These kids were terrified. Not drunk scared, not prank scared, but actually terrified. One girl was so shaken up, she was throwing up in the station parking lot. The night dispatcher called me, and I was over there in 5 minutes. I got their statements. They said something had chased them. They'd been sitting around the fire, talking. Normal stuff, right? Around 11-ish, they heard something in the trees, something pushing past branches, moving around them out in the dark. They thought it was deer or elk, so they called out to scare it off. But their guest didn't leave. It kept circling them just outside the firelight. And then they saw it, standing at the edge of the clearing, just beyond where the fire lit things up. Something very tall and thin that was watching them. They all saw it. All 4 that made it back agreed on that. One kid yelled at it, threw a bottle in its direction, and that's when the thing took a step forward, just enough into the light, and that's when they all ran. A kid named Jake was at the back, and he could hear it behind them, crashing through the brush but moving too fast. Faster, he said, than an Olympic sprinter. He said it sounded like it was on all 4s part of the time, like a wild animal, but then upright again. The sounds it made, he couldn't describe them, just said they weren't right. But the thing is, Sarah wasn't with them. We got search and rescue mobilized. We had about 20 volunteers out there by 1 in the morning. It was a cold night, temperature in the 30s. We searched with flashlights and flashers, calling Sarah's name. We found the bonfire site around 2 a.m. The fire was still smoldering. We found Sarah's car, doors open, keys in the ignition. Their stuff had been scattered around, like beer cans and blankets in someone's jacket. We found Sarah's shoes, but no Sarah. The search continued all night. We covered around a 3-mile radius from that clearing, but found nothing. The sun came up around 6:30. Dave called in state police for a wider search. I was exhausted, running on coffee and adrenaline, but we had to keep going. We had to find Sarah. And we did. We found her around 8 in the morning. She was walking along Highway 89, about 5 miles from where they'd been. She still was in her clothes from that night, jeans and a hoodie, but she was barefoot. I mean, her shoes were back at the campsite. Her feet were torn up from the asphalt and rocks. A trucker had spotted her and called it in. When we got to her, she was just walking, staring straight ahead, just walking north along the shoulder. We pulled up alongside her, called her name, but didn't get a reaction. She kept walking. I got out and walked up to her and said, "Sarah, honey, it's okay, we're here. You're safe now." But I didn't get anything from her. She walked right past me. Her eyes were open, but it was like she wasn't seeing anything. I gently took her arm to stop her, and finally she stopped. But even then, she didn't look at me. I got her in the car and drove her to the clinic. A Dr. Matthews was waiting. He checked her over while the parents drove in. They had been up all night with us searching. They didn't find any injuries except her feet, no signs of assault, and no drugs beyond a bit of beer from earlier. But she still wouldn't talk and wouldn't react to any questions, not even to her parents when they arrived. Her mother was crying, trying to get Sarah to look at her, saying, "Baby, please, say something, please." Sarah's dad stood there with his hand on his daughter's shoulder, looking hollowed out. I'll never forget that look, that scene. They took her to the hospital and kept her there for 3 days. They ran all sorts of tests. Physically, she was fine except for her feet. Mentally, doctors said dissociative state, trauma response, but she wasn't coming out of it. She had come back, but still wasn't talking. Not to doctors, not to her parents, not to us. It was like something inside her had been shut off. Her mom called me twice that week, asking if we'd found anything else, something we'd missed that may explain this. She especially wanted to know if anyone had been arrested yet. I had to tell her no. We didn't have anything, didn't know where Sarah had been those 8 or 9 hours, and didn't know what she saw. Sarah couldn't or wouldn't tell us. Last I heard, years later, Sarah still doesn't talk about that night. Someone told me she moved to California and now works in an office somewhere, living a normal life. Yes, she started talking again eventually, but never about that night. Whatever she saw, whatever happened to Sarah, she's kept it locked up inside. That hit me pretty deep, because my daughter Emily was close to her age, just a few years younger. They went to the same school. Emily knew Sarah from around town. After Sarah came back and everyone saw how okay she wasn't, that's when Emily started having real nightmares. She woke up screaming one night. I didn't know how to handle that. Then she started to ask me to stop going out on night shifts. She would cry when I had to leave for work in the evenings. I sat her down and explained to her that this was my job, that I had to help people and keep them safe. But I understood that. I was scared too, but I wasn't allowed to show it. I couldn't let her see how scared I was, because that would make everything worse. So I hugged her, and I told her it would be okay, that I would be careful and I would come home. Then every night I'd go out there and patrol the streets that felt so wrong now, looking for something that I didn't understand, something that was completely unexplainable and couldn't be fought. By Thanksgiving, that town felt like a different place entirely. A good third of those kids stayed home from school now. Some pulled out entirely for homeschooling. The grocery store was empty during evening hours. Everyone was doing their shopping during the day. Bars and the diner closed early now. Nobody wanted to be out after dark, if they could help it. Town meetings got real heated. We had one right before Thanksgiving, and it was chaos. People were screaming at the mayor, at Dave, even at me, demanding answers we didn't have yet, and demanding we do something. But what were we supposed to do? We had patrolled, investigated, called in state police. The state had sent in a couple of detectives who spent a week in town interviewing people and looking at evidence. They didn't find anything we hadn't already found. There were no answers we didn't already have. One guy stood up and said we should organize armed patrols, civilians taking shifts. Another guy said, just burn the hills, smoke out whatever was living out there. Someone else said we should call in the National Guard. It was panic, pure panic, and I understood it because I felt it too. But all I could do was stand there next to Dave and the mayor and pretend I had it under control, when I absolutely did not. The mayor made more calls to the state, to the governor's office, to anyone who'd listen, asking for help and resources for anything. We got sympathy, but not much else. What were they supposed to send, though? We couldn't even tell them what we were dealing with. A tall figure that might be multiple figures, that kills animals but doesn't eat them, that mimics people's voices perfectly and tries to lure them out of their homes, that runs on all fours and leaves footprints that just disappear. How do you ask for help with that? Who do you call? The sightings were happening almost every night then. The hardware store sold out of ammunition twice, sold out of locks and deadbolts too. The Navajo families in town wouldn't talk about it. We had about 30 people from the reservation living here for work. I'd known some of them for years. They were good people, but they shut down completely whenever I asked. Some left town in November and moved back to the reservation. The ones who stayed kept their families inside at night and didn't say anything. I kept on pushing. Finally, a guy named Thomas pulled me aside outside the post office. He even looked around, and then he said, "Keep your family inside at night. Just stop going out after dark unless you have to, and don't talk to it if you see it." Don't talk to it? If you see it. Yeah, don't say anything. And don't answer it if it talks to you. Well, what is it, Thomas? He shook his tired-looking head. I can't say its name. I can't tell you. But it's very old and very angry. And it knows you're scared. That's as much as I can tell you. Keep your family inside. That was it. I wouldn't get more of an explanation. I went home and told Carol about my conversation with Thomas. She looked at me like I'd lost my mind. "We need to leave," she said. "We just need to pack up and leave." "Carol, I can't do that. I've got a job here." "What job? You can't even catch it. You can't protect anyone." That hurt, but she wasn't wrong. I just didn't know what else to do. I was deputy sheriff. This was my town. I couldn't just leave and abandon people. By December, maybe 40 or 50 people had moved away. Houses were sitting empty and businesses were closing. You'd drive through town at 6 o'clock, sundown by 5 in winter, and it was like a ghost town. The streets were empty and houses were dark. The people who were home, all the lights were on inside. Everyone would lock themselves in after dark, waiting for morning. At this point, Emily was making a bed on our floor every night, and Carol stopped arguing. We were both exhausted, scared. Carol would talk about leaving every few days, moving back to Phoenix or New Mexico, where her sister lived. Maybe after the holidays, we would decide, I told her. Maybe it'll get better. But I didn't believe that, nor did she. Then things got worse. There were break-ins while people were home. Someone called one morning, saying someone had been in her house during the night. She'd woke up around 3 a.m. to use the bathroom when she noticed her kitchen light was on. But she never left it on. She went downstairs and found the back door wide open. There was food on the counter too, like someone had made themselves a sandwich and just left everything out. Nothing was stolen. The TV was still there and her purse with cash in it was still on the table. But things had been moved around, with books pulled off shelves and cabinets opened. Her couch cushions were flipped over. It was like someone had gone through her house looking at things, touching things, possibly searching for something. I went over there that afternoon and checked her back door. There were no signs of forced entry. She said she was sure she'd locked it, though. I believed her. This woman in particular was a careful individual. She lived alone and had to be. I did find muddy footprints on her kitchen floor, but they were smeared, and I couldn't make much out of it. But I had to take photos anyway. "Why would someone do this?" she asked me. "They didn't take anything. They just went through my things." I told her I didn't know, but I did recommend she get better locks, and if she started to feel unsafe in her own home, it might be best to move in with family for a while. She said she might, and 2 days later, she moved to Prescott to live with her daughter. I don't think she ever came back. There were 3 more break-ins that week, and of course, the patterns were the same. The door would be left open and things would be moved around. Sometimes food was left out or eaten, but nothing would be stolen. One man said someone had been through his closet, messed with individual articles of clothes, and left them on the bed. Another family found muddy footprints throughout their house going into every room, but all the windows and doors were still locked. They could not figure out how anyone got in, and I couldn't either. Dave and I started to patrol more at night, but even though the town was small, between the 2 of us we couldn't be everywhere. And honestly, I don't think it would have mattered. Whatever was doing this didn't seem to care if we were around or not. Then there was what happened to Edward. One night mid-December, a man named Edward called 911 around 10 p.m. Edward was an elderly man and lived alone in a house on the east side. He was about 75 years old. His grandson was Jake, one of the kids who had been with Sarah that night. Edward's voice on the call was shaky. He said someone was in his house right now, walking around downstairs. He had locked himself in his bedroom and pushed his dresser against the door. I was there as quick as I could be, and Dave was right behind me. We went in with our weapons drawn and flashlights on. The front door was wide open, the cold December air blowing in. The house was dark, except for a light upstairs where Edward was. "Police! Anyone in here? Make yourself known," Dave called out. But there was no sound, no movement. We cleared the first floor. Living room, kitchen, bathroom, nobody. But of course, we found the muddy prints. Going through every room, up and down the hallway. The prints we'd been seeing in other people's homes. Long feet, wide stride. Some of them looked like they'd been made by someone on all fours. "Upstairs," Dave said, and gestured with his head. We went up slowly. Edward's bedroom door was closed, with the dresser wedged against it from the inside. We called to him. "Edward, it's Sheriff Dave and Deputy. We're coming in." We heard him move the dresser. He struggled a bit. Then the door opened and Edward was there with a baseball bat and hands shaking. He looked afraid. "It was down there," he said, "walking around. I heard it going through my things and opening cabinets. It walked past my door 2 times. I could hear it breathing." We searched his whole house, checking every room, every closet, under beds in the attic. Nothing, but the prints were everywhere. Whatever had made them had been exactly where Edward had said.